Welcome to our webinar, everyone. We're going to go over a really great topic today. We're going to cover how to master the art of real estate negotiations and go over a few strategies for success. We've got a wonderful presenter with us today, Monica. She has spoken before. She is a trial attorney. She is also a certified arbitrator and mediator, so she's an expert in handling negotiations. And so we're really blessed to have her here. She's a complete expert in this field. She's got 30 plus years of experience. And instead of me telling you all about her, I'm going to let her introduce herself a little bit to you and just kind of tell you a little bit about herself.
Oh, thanks, Ben. And it's so great to be back with everybody. I enjoy these series so much. So a huge thank you to Ben, his team, for allowing me to come on in. Yeah, as Ben said, I'm an attorney, a trial attorney, going on 32 years in practice. I'm headquartered out of Atlanta, Georgia. My practice is national in nature. I represent big brokerages, real estate agencies, property management companies, lenders, to help them with all of their problems. But one of the things I really grew to love, Ben, as part of my real estate trial practice was participating in mediation and arbitration, to the point that I decided I wanted to get certified. I wanted to become a member of that group, and have been loving it and just been enjoying it so much. So I'm really excited to share some of my knowledge that I've learned and some tips and tricks as we talk about good negotiation skills.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited. We got a lot to cover, so real quick, I'm going to get into our agenda just to make sure everyone knows what we're going to be talking about. We're going to go over three really main things. We're going to go over key principles of successful negotiations. We're going to dive into a few case studies to be able to look at the negotiation tactics and make sure that you're able to identify them and know which type of negotiation it is. And then we're going to wrap up with some tips that are actually going to help you with your negotiation skills. So to get us started, we're going to go into Negotiations 101, go over those key foundations and principles. And I'd like to start with, Monica, maybe could you just kind of go over why people need to negotiate and why they're just so important?
So why negotiate, right? The actual definition of negotiation, friends, is to resolve conflicts peacefully, right? That's what someone said. What is negotiation, right? Well, it's stuff, if you think about it, everybody, that we do every day. Anybody who's a parent, you probably negotiated a bedtime, or why they can't have, candy before dinner. Maybe with your partner, you might be negotiating, who's going to take out the trash. But obviously, in the role of a real estate professional and a realtor, obviously the number one thing you're negotiating are to get deals closed successfully, right? And this is true of really any business that we have, is that we want to see ourselves succeed, Ben, in working towards whatever it is that we're trying to resolve. And then, at the end of the day, I took a lesson from my friend here who's on the screen, and this is just an unsolicited plug, someone who's very dear to me. Her name is Dr. Cindy McGovern. She goes by Dr. Cindy. She wrote these two books, and I give them to all of my friends or neighbors or whoever who have kids graduating from college. But Dr. Cindy teaches, she's a doctor of psychology, but she teaches that every job is a sales job and that you have to sell yourself. And that's, to me, so important, because you might think, well, Monica's a lawyer. What is she selling? Well, I'm selling myself, right? I got to tell you that I'm the most, the best person out there for the job. But if you think about negotiation, it's just another arm of selling, right? It's just about, getting what we need to obtain, whether it's a result that we're totally happy with, maybe totally unhappy with, but at least it gets it done. So to me, negotiating is all these many things, but at the end of the day, ultimately it's resolution or conflict, even if it's a small conflict, having that resolved and wrapped up.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that. So as we kind of dive into this, could you review some of the areas in real estate that you're frequently seeing people need to negotiate in?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is, just you're winning your clients, right? You're trying to get that listing, you're doing listing presentations. You're trying to say, why am I better than this company? Same with our buyers, right? Now, granted, we don't have tons of buyers, I guess. I guess we do have lots of buyers, right, friends? But our inventory is still somewhat sketchy. But, obviously in your average day, wearing your real estate hat, it's winning the clients that are going to get you that revenue and get you those deals. Obviously, once we've gotten a contract going, it's getting that deal closed. Maybe we did great, Ben, on the upfront, getting it all put together, but something comes up post-inspection and we have to then, negotiate further to try to get the deal closed. It's important, I would think, for our realtor friends to be thinking about commission splits. Maybe you come into one company with one split and you go to somewhere else and you're advocating again for yourself as to what your compensation may be. And then depending on if the owner or the broker of a company, you're probably negotiating contracts for services. So we sometimes don't think about, maybe getting that new water cooler service as being a negotiation, but it is, right? You might be asking questions. You might be looking at certain vendors, looking at contract terms. And then obviously, if you have within your company people that you are hiring, people you're hiring to provide assistance or employees, obviously negotiating with them as to, what are their terms, what would they like is very common. I'll share, Ben, that in our current world, we're seeing, I'm sure everybody is, but I certainly am seeing as an owner of a business, much more negotiation with my potential employees than really ever before. You used to say, hey, Ben, here's your salary, here are your hours. What do you think? And now you're actually seeing more and more people, because of the principles like sell yourself, to be negotiating as well when you're hiring and onboarding.
Perfect, perfect. Love all those examples. A lot of great ways that we're seeing negotiations in the market here. So when it comes to negotiations, what can we be doing to get parties to come to the table and actually begin negotiations?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ben, because oftentimes, we can participate in a webinar like this, get lots of good information about the art of negotiation. But if we can't get people going and get them to the table to start the discussion, what are we going to do? I often encourage people, both when I'm a mediator and when I'm wearing my attorney hat representing my clients, to make the first move. There's people that say, oh, that's a sign of weakness. And it's actually not. It's a sign of strength. It's showing that you feel confident enough in your position to make that first offer, to make that first move towards resolution and start the conversation, right? It's also very important, Ben, to be very, very transparent and clear. In other words, gang, don't be telling lies. Don't blow smoke. Don't mislead people that, I know if I can get this dialogue going for settlement, I know I can get him to go as high as $100,000, right? Well, if don't know that for sure, don't say it, right? Don't be telling people things that aren't actually 100% true. Be transparent. Also, I'm a big fan of articulating the end goal. I had a boss many, many years ago who used to teach us that at the end of every business lunch, after you got to know people, you would say, Ben, I want your business, right? Articulating that end goal. So if I go into a negotiation and I say, Mr. Smith, I want this listing. I know that I'm the best person for the job. Here's why. And I know that you will choose me. Articulate where you want to be. It often removes some of the sense of uncertainty as to where the negotiation may go if we from the very beginning set what the end goal will be.
I love that. So what happens when we're maybe dealing with a really tough negotiator or maybe a party who just isn't willing to come to the table or just maybe isn't negotiating or budging much? Like, is there something we should maybe try to be doing there?
Sure. I mean, I still think it's very important to go back to that articulation of the end goal. For example, when I'm wearing my mediator hat, right, I will say to people, do you really want to settle this today? Because there's some people that come in because they have to have a discussion. They don't want to. But if you could just keep reiterating, look, do you want to get this resolved? I had a mediation about a month ago where the parties were neighbors and they were fighting over a driveway, very contentious. And even though they both did not like each other, I kept hearing from each party, I want this done. I want this done. So I think if you just keep, even if people get stuck in the details, if you keep just saying, look, we can get this done, it makes a big difference.
That makes sense. So I know we talked about the importance of the 3 C's when we were kind of going over content and just kind of talking about how negotiations can be done successfully. I actually had 3 C's when I was growing up. I was a hockey goalie, so my dad made 3 C's for me: consistency, confidence, composure. So when you mentioned 3 C's, I thought that was so awesome. But could you kind of dive into those 3 C's and just kind of discuss how they relate to negotiations?
Absolutely. The 3 C's of negotiation are really, they make sense if you think about it. And it's really kind of the styles and the form that negotiation takes. The first one is compromise. And this is where you, as the person negotiating, you value the equality in the outcome. You're okay with the split the difference. Nobody wins, but nobody loses, right? You come in looking for common ground, looking to compromise. The other flip side of that, of course, would be competing. You do not care at all how the outcome affects the other party. You're in it to win it. And frankly, maintaining a relationship doesn't matter to you. That was initially how my two neighbors fighting over the driveway started. They didn't care, the one side did, about being neighbors with them. So, that style of negotiation can be, very tough and very brutal, but for some people, depending on what they're doing, it can be effective. The last one, and this is the most common one, is collaborating, right? This is where the outcome is mutually beneficial to both parties, right? You're working through a problem to help get the most of what someone can out of it for each side. And usually it's the everybody wins approach, right? I'm going to be able to list your house. You're happy with my agreement to take maybe 0.5% less. I'm okay with that because I'm getting the listing. And obviously collaboration, working where everybody is satisfied. And again, satisfaction doesn't have to be 100%. It could be that you're at 90%, but you're satisfied at that 90%. That is obviously the best way to negotiate and the most effective method, because there you also are preserving the relationship, which from a sales perspective should lead to future business and relationships down the road.
I love it. I love it. So when we're actually negotiating, what are some of the key stages or steps that we need to consider that are in the process?
A great question. Yeah. So, when you're thinking about negotiation, and this can be true if we take our example of, I'm preparing a listing agreement, or I'm going in, maybe we're about to negotiate an amendment after we've had an inspection to property, right? We need to think about preparing and planning, right? This is both a question of getting all your facts and information set, like think a listing agreement, the preparation of that, the planning, but it's also understanding your audience, right? What am I going to be arguing and pitching back to this person, right? Once we feel that we are prepared and planned to go into the negotiation, we need to be prepared to justify our ask, right? What am I asking for? So, for example, you're going in post inspection, you're trying to keep the contract for sale together, and are you really going to be asking something completely crazy, all this, hundreds of thousands of dollars of stuff? That's not going to really justify, right, the idea of you getting to the closing table, to the finish line. So, clarifying and justifying it both for the other side and for yourself is critical. Obviously, the middle stage of negotiation, once you're in it, Ben, is bargaining. This is the back and forth, right? This is the trying to get, work through it. Going back to my driveway example, I spent quite some time kind of moving from party to party, trying to listen and hear what they really wanted, right? To try to get us to where we had some real hard conversations. And obviously, problem solving is a huge part of negotiation, because this is where you may think you're at a true impasse, right? I just cannot get this seller to agree on this amendment. I don't know what we're going to do. And then it becomes a question of, okay, do we really want the impasse? Do we really want to get it done, or do we want to walk away? And how do we get there if we really want to get it done? Is it time to split the difference, right? We're arguing over, say, an amount of money. Fine, let's split the difference. Seller isn't going to pay, doesn't want to pay more than, whatever amount, but let's, rather than letting the deal go down for one of $1,000, everybody makes a move forward, splits the difference, and we move forward. Obviously, it's very important in real estate in all 50 states where we're coming to, that when you settle something in a negotiation with your closure, you need to be sure that this is in writing as it relates to real estate. Every single state in America has a requirement that things regarding land be in writing. But, maybe you're negotiating something else. Maybe it is just a handshake, depending on what it is, if it's not real estate related. We always need to be cognizant, though, of the legal requirements once we've reached a deal when it comes to enforceability. So, we go through these stages, we get our solution, Ben, and then we get it all documented and ready to go. And then that lets us move forward to what our action items will be.
Perfect. Perfect. I really like it. I also like how you also emphasize, again, everything in writing. It's really important that we get these things in writing. So I love that you also just really hone in on that to make sure everyone hears that.
Absolutely. It's called the Statute of Frauds, everybody. And it goes back to old England, to old England times, when all our real estate laws came from there. And it's about the concept that if something is not in writing, it's more suspect to be not accurate. So that's why one of the requirements for land transfers and deals with land, to ensure everyone's on the same page, requires that writing.
I love it. So we're actually going to kind of switch gears now, everyone. So we got into negotiations 101. Now we're going to get into three kind of case studies. And I'm going to let Monica run it here. I'll be in the background. I'll put up the polls when we need them. So we're going to ask you to answer some questions as she goes through the examples. But I'm going to hand it over to Monica to go over our first one now.
Absolutely. So hopefully I have a lot of Disney fans out there, but this will be focusing in, friends, on those three C's, those three styles: competing, compromise, and collaborating, right? And this is the story of what's called the Florida Project. You may have seen a movie about this. It's a very interesting story of how in the early 1960s, Walt Disney created a few companies with very misleading names in Florida. The most notorious, of course, being MT Lot LLC, Empty Lot, haha. Right. So Walt Disney sends his trusted staff to all the courthouses in Central Florida incognito to investigate who owns what kind of contracts and mortgages are on there, because he wants to keep this grand scheme secret, right? The firm's agents, so Disney's agents, right, or these MT Lot LLC agents, were not allowed to reveal to their potential, the people they were buying from, who was actually interested in the land, because Walt did not want anybody to know the actual client, the actual purchaser, was actually Walt Disney and the Walt Disney Company. So basically, what type of negotiation in the Florida Project example is this? Is this competing, right? Is this collaborating, or is this compromising, right? So what do we think it is, right? Remembering that this is Walt. Basically, he doesn't care if these people like him. He just wants that land, and he'll do it even with, frankly, telling, lies and misleading people. So competing, compromise, or collaborating. What do we think?
Give you guys about 15 more seconds, and then I'll switch it over to the next slide and we'll close down the poll here. So everyone get your answers in real quick. We got 5 more seconds and we'll shut the poll down.
Very good.
All right.
Okay, so there's the answer on the screen. This is obviously competing, right? Exactly. Very good, Elizabeth. Yeah, compete. He didn't care about the outcomes, how they affected the other party. Walt was in it to win it. Maintaining a relationship doesn't matter to you. When the people in Central Florida realized what had occurred, they literally lost their minds, right? They were like, oh my gosh. And as we know, the value of that land is just incredible. Part of the other interesting story about that land in the Florida Project was there was a lot of swampland, and Walt's agents led people to believe that that was completely valueless, which was not true at all, because as we know, if you've been to Disney World, you can think of all sort of how those moats and the water all actually make up part of what those lands actually are. So yes, excellent, everybody. That is competing. All right, let's go to the next Disney themed example. Okay, Pixar. Hopefully everybody has seen a Pixar movie. That's Toy Story, WALL-E. Obviously, Pixar, when it was formed, was one of the first 3D computer graphic film companies, creating such classics as like Finding Nemo. And it created a real competitive rise in the computer graphics industry, or CG, right? CG technology. Pixar, which was owned partially by Steven Spielberg and others, emerged as one of the most promising players in this field. Disney, who of course does 2D, right? Not that 3D computer graphic animation, like think Snow White, very flat. They were struggling to compete with the likes of Pixar, and they had lots of options to consider. Should they try to do something on their own? Should they look to some other company? Or should they look to Pixar? But if they did look to Pixar, would Pixar's freedom and creativity fit with Walt Disney's corporate governance, right? So what does everybody think? Is that compromise, collaborating, or competing? And I'll tell you, it's close to being 2, okay? But it's 1 for a specific reason, and I'll tell you why.
All right, everyone, we'll give you another 15 seconds here to get your answers in. So final countdown here. See them trickling in still. So we'll give it 5 more seconds.
Love me some Pixar, I tell you. So fun. I actually would call this compromise, not collaboration. And here's why. Here's the difference. Okay. So I can see where you all were thinking collaboration, but here's why it's compromise. Okay. It's because Disney had a choice, right? they could decide, do they want to potentially, build one in-house? Pixar wasn't necessarily right wanting to sell, but they were willing to do what needed to be done, but they both wanted equality in the outcome, right? It was sort of a split the difference, right? Nobody really won, but nobody really lost because everybody was okay with the outcome. But it wasn't like at any cost whatsoever. Disney could have walked away from Pixar because they did have other choices, right? There was an aspect of where Disney could have said, fine, we'll compromise to get it done and go with you, Pixar, maybe paying a little more because we don't want to have to build it ourselves. So, but I can see how it could also be collaboration. But let's compare that to the next one and see what you think now. The next one is good old Lucasfilms, right? George Lucas, just a masterful, masterful filmmaker, the creator of the entire Star Wars world. I don't know about anybody who's my age, a child of the 80s and 70s, but we saw Star Wars in 1978, I think about 25 times. My dad used to stand up and clap at the end of every movie. So, Lucasfilms was one of these examples with Disney where sometimes the negotiation planning process takes much longer than expected, but it's worth it to get the best results. Disney was requiring Lucas for $4.5 billion, okay? Michael Eisner, the head of Disney, and Lucas had engaged in a negotiation planning process that literally went on for almost 4 years, right? It was very methodical. It was built on the strong reputations of both company, mutual understanding, lots of research. And in the very first meeting, when Michael Eisner at Disney approached George Lucas, Lucas looked him in the eyes at lunch and said, look, it's my content. It's this world I've created that matters to me more than the money, right? And as they went forward to create this deal, that was one of the largest drivers. So what then, my friends, are this of the three? Is this competing, compromise, or collaborating? Perfect.
See a lot of answers coming in. I love it. I love it.
Fabulous. So glad to see so many of you here today, too. Thanks for coming.
We'll give you all about 5 more seconds here, and then we'll shut it down. All right, we're going to move on.
All right. So as you probably guessed, very good, everybody. As you guessed, this was collaboration. Exactly right. That the outcome is mutually beneficial to both parties. They worked together for a long time to help get the most that they could out of it. As we know, it certainly was an everybody wins approach. If you've been to any Disney park, the Star Wars presence is overwhelming, so well done. You literally, if you've ever been to the one in California or Florida, you feel like you're walking literally into another world. The level of the detail is amazing. And that's what George Lucas wanted. And that's why Disney made such promises to keep that intact. So those are 3 great examples of those different types. And again, I thought it was kind of fun just to talk about our friends at Disney. So good examples.
Well, we're going to shift gears now. We're going to finish with our final section here that goes into some tips to actually help you with your negotiations. So for us to start off, could you go over some tips to consider when we're in the midst of the negotiation?
Absolutely. So we're in the middle of negotiations, right? The very first thing is we have to consider the consequences and the choices. So we're negotiating, let's say, that amendment in the middle of a contract after repairs have been done. Okay, well, what if we don't get it worked out? What if we don't resolve it? We're going to lose the entire deal, right? So we've got to think about, okay, this is where we get into the what am I fighting for? The is it worth it, right? What are the consequences if I say no, or the consequences if I say yes? And what are my choices, right? Always thinking about, okay, what's my next move on the chessboard makes a huge difference, right? You need to also be thinking about, okay, fine, what's the best possible outcome at this point in the negotiation? In other words, what's the worst thing that can happen? What's the best thing, right? The worst thing could potentially be the end of the deal, right? Or, if you're negotiating hard for position, you may not get the position if you don't back off a little bit, right? So you have to be thinking best case, worst case scenario, right? Listening and identifying, Ben, the true problem is critical. Going back to my mediation story where I was wearing my mediation hat, I had these 2 neighbors fighting. And what I kept hearing from the plaintiff is, who of course was suing for all sorts of money, and they were fighting over who could use this driveway. But what I kept hearing was, I want this done number one, but I want my attorney's fees back. I want this done. I want my attorney's fees. So I honed in on that attorney's fees, ignoring his demands, for hundreds of thousands of other dollars. So when I got into the private negotiation with them, I said, okay, tell me about your attorney's fees. How much are they? We never again in that mediation talked about all those other damages he wanted because I had listened, right? And I had picked up what really was important to them. Obviously, problem solving when we're wearing a hat in negotiation, it's working to find out what is the real issue here, right? Let's say you are in a negotiation to sell a house and you just can't understand why is your seller being so stubborn about maybe a price or something that is to be included and isn't. Well, think about it. Maybe the real issue here is that this was their parents' home and maybe it's very sad for them to be letting it go, so you may have to actually look more at not just the problem that's in front of you that you're negotiating, but what else is really at play here? What else is driving things? It is critically important, as we said before, build trust. Integrity matters. You should never be lying in mediation. It is even not bluffing, right? Some people say, oh, you can bluff. No, my personal experience is bluffing puts you potentially into the dangerous zone of being viewed as being untruthful. And the minute you lose your credibility in negotiation, we all know this in business, you're done, right? Your reputation is the best thing you have. And it's a real fine line, right, between strength and, being overly aggressive. But it's really important, in my opinion, to keep your composure, be confident, right? If you panic, that is not going to equal success, right? So being strong, keeping your composure, always being very respectful in your negotiations is very critical. And then really the biggest trick too, I would say, don't, consider some times when silence is golden, right? You've made what you want them to believe is your last offer, right? Be quiet for a while. I'm not talking about days and days, but maybe it is days and days. But rather than just shooting back out that email, we're not going to do that. We're only going to give you $100. Think for a minute, because the power of silence, right, makes the other side start thinking, oh no, what's going on, right? Are they going to walk away? What's going to happen? So silence, giving a pause is really, really important when you're approaching negotiation. And it's a really good consideration to have.
A lot of good tips there. I really like a lot of those, especially the final one, silence. I know we hear it a lot. So it's a good one. I feel like we hear it, but we don't practice it well. So we need to really just work on practicing that.
Yes.
So as we actually negotiate with the opposing party, what are a few things that we can do to either, put ourselves in their shoes or help help us just kind of consider their point of view?
It's a great, great question. And yeah, this is a great perception versus reality. Look at the cartoon, right? Yay, I'm saved. He's not really. The dude's in a little float on a boat, right? Being aware of what's going on beyond, just the words being said and the other's perspective is just really a key to successful negotiation, right? It is a very fine line to be very, very aggressive versus being very strong and confident in your position. Going back to my mediation with the two people fighting over the driveway, the plaintiff who felt that, he was absolutely right was frankly being overly aggressive, right? He wanted to punish these defendants who, just didn't know about who owned this driveway. And it really, I thought, hurt the plaintiff's position because they were seeming much more aggressive rather than being confident in the fact that they thought they could win. Because if you're acting too aggressive, it's just going to turn the other side off, right, Ben? I don't want to negotiate with you. You're being unreasonable, right? Reading the room, and when I say that, I do mean sometimes the literal room, but also I just mean, read the bigger totality of everything, right? Get a sense of what's really at play, what's really going on. Again, go back to the example of, why is someone insisting on a certain price? Maybe it's, again, something emotional to them. It's also very important to pay attention to how others are communicating and what's maybe really at the heart of it. Again, going back to my driveway mediation, the defendant who really had kind of given up that he was ever going to use this driveway again, said, look, sitting on the driveway is a mailbox I built with my dad when I was a boy. The man was like in his 50s. He's like, I'd really like that mailbox. When I conveyed that back to the plaintiff in the other room, he went, no. He said, no, he's not getting that mailbox. And I said to him right to his face, that's petty, right? That is, that's valuable, right? That's a valuable thing, right? to that defendant, right? Don't assume what's valuable and what's not. He absolutely, right? That was an important piece to get the defendant to do it, to pay some money and get it done. But you can't assume what the real value is in something, and paying attention to how people communicate and what that value is communicated is important. And obviously, always golden rule, Ben. Step into the other shoes. How would you feel if you were in their shoes, right? That can help you, one, kind of get past an impasse, like, okay, I can see that. But two, it also may provide some clarity as to, all right, what am I going to have to decide, right? Whether or not we're going to be able to go forward or not. Are they really not seeing the real problem here? Are they not really doing what needs to be done? But stepping into that other pair of shoes, I've always found to be very effective, because it forces you to see through the other side and forces you really to see, okay, how we could resolve this. It's real helpful. I've done that for years with success.
I love it. This is kind of the tips for, emotional intelligence, or EQ as we hear it. So I feel like
Yes,
a lot of those really hone in on that, and saying, hey, let's work on our, our emotional intelligence here.
absolutely, definitely.
So to wrap up this section, could you go over a few things that we could either practice or that we can, personally implement, that would help us be more successful with our negotiations?
Absolutely. And this really comes down to how we behave and our body language. We've all learned you don't sit like this, right? Because this is closed off. This is not, you don't sit in a negotiation session with your arms folded in front of you, right? You should be loose and calm and confident, sitting back a little bit. You should not let your face tell the tale. I shared with Ben, friends in the audience, a very stressful negotiation I had with one of my realtor clients on a lead-based paint EPA investigation. My client was facing hundreds of thousands of dollars in fines. I was preparing for that. We were in a Zoom negotiation conference. The EPA came back in and they said, Ms. Gilroy, we're prepared to accept the sum of $18,000 as the fine. And I broke the cardinal rule. I went like that. I was so happy. I was like so excited. And she said, I can see by your face, you're very pleased with that number, and I was like, oh, you blew it, Monica, because then it was real hard for me to negotiate off of that, because I didn't keep my Lady Gaga poker face. I just, my expression was too much, right? Pay attention to other forms of communications as well. The eyes, right? Maybe, you're sitting with the husband and a wife and you're discussing what, the price may be of something, and suddenly somebody's eyes get real big. That's usually a sign that, maybe they're not okay with it, or, what does that mean? Maybe if someone starts getting upset, right? If they're told something in negotiation, they start crying, that's signaling to you that maybe we don't want to go on that topic, right? We want to be, paying attention to how they're communicating other than with their words, right? Posture is very important, right? You should not be, if you are all slumped over, you look defeated. Sitting up straight when you're negotiating, again, comes from a form of confidence, of a position of authority, right? It's a good thing. Speaking to the decision maker is really, really important. And that's sort of another lesson I learned in this last mediation about the driveway. We were sitting at a table, Ben, where the wife was across from me. Next to me on one side was the husband, on the other side was their lawyer. Just naturally, I was talking directly to the wife because she was across from me. And about 5 or 6 minutes into my blabbing, she went like this. She said, talk to him. And I realized, oh my gosh, he's in this dynamic, he was the decision maker. So I literally turned my head and I just kept, the whole rest of the time, I spoke directly to the husband, because it was, he was the one in that relationship that was making the decision. So if we're speaking to the decision maker, that, hopefully makes it a lot easier to get to where we're going. And obviously, good old eye contact, right? I don't know about you all with small children, but I taught my kids early on that making eye contact, yes, I know we have stranger danger, but when people speak to you, look at them, right? Respond back. But it's very true in negotiation. Looking someone in the face creates an incredible amount of credibility, honesty. Some people are in tune with reading your face and looking seeing what it looks like. These little things, this body language stuff, makes a huge difference in negotiation, because a cool demeanor, a calm demeanor, speaking, nicely, I'm not a big believer in the yelling and the screaming. I don't think that gets you anywhere. But speaking very authoritatively, using your voice as a power tool, looking them in the eye, it makes a big difference. I really think it does.
I love it. A lot of great tips here on just ways that we can, get better at negotiating and really appreciate just all the content and information that you brought here, Monica. I know there's a lot of actionable things for everybody here. So thank you so much for just a lot of
Welcome.
wonderful content here.
You're welcome. I love it.
So we're going to move into just a few action items. I know everyone likes action items of what to take out of a webinar. So we got a handful of them here, and they're pretty easy for us to do. So the first one is, hey, let's create or check our process for negotiating. How are we doing that based off of what we heard? Are there areas that we can improve on? And then one exercise I'd like you to maybe consider is reflect on a recent negotiation. Identify which of the three C's it was. And then based off of what you heard today, are there areas you could improve or, the process, think about that and just kind of critique yourself and just say, hey, could I have done it a little better? Then also, one of the things Monica talked about is how negotiating can impact your character, your reputation, your persona. So consider how you approach negotiations and how that can, impact that side of your professional relationship. And then finally, let's read Dr. McGovern's two books. Those are great books. Every Job is a Sales Job, and also Sell Yourself. So those are some things that we can do coming out of this webinar. We're going to get into the Q&A here. So if you got any questions, please drop them in the chat bar and we'll make sure we get you those answers. So I'm going to bring up the Q&A area and we'll dive into that.
Great. And thanks again, Ben, and everybody for always having me on. And, friends in the audience, feel free to let Ben know if there's other topics you'd like to hear from me. I love speaking and teaching, as you all know, so always here to help anything that's of interest. While we wait for a question, I'll tell you how that mediation about the driveway settled. How about that? Okay.
I love it.
So
Let's hear the
how about
story.
that, right? So I'm wearing my mediator, right? So plaintiff, right, says you can't use the driveway. Defendant thought it was his driveway. Court said, nope, not your driveway, right? So it came, remember, and I said, I'm listening, I'm hearing the attorney's fees. So they went back and forth, and they got to an impasse of 20,000 for attorney's fees and 25,000. And finally, the plaintiff said, you can have the mailbox, you can have time to build your own new driveway. And I told them to go home and think about it over the weekend. And over that weekend, both parties realized they wanted it done. And they each came back voluntarily with, if the other will take 22.5, we'll get it done. So I resolved that. I resolved that by having them come to the middle. Here's a question.
Here we go. So the question is, how can I convey to my seller that this deal we are under contract, even we go on a later day, is one that is the best on his side?
Great question. Yeah. No, that's fantastic. I think that's where you have to really do almost like reality testing, right? You have to really explain the outcomes like we were talking about. You need to also play the card that you're an expert, right? He's a competitive and we got a full price. Yeah. I mean, if you have somebody that is the best it's going to be, this is where you need to become very much in control and say, look, I'm an expert. You have hired me because I'm an expert. I am telling you that you accepting this, there isn't going to be anything better. And then tell him the reality, if you let this go, is it is very unlikely another one is going to come along. So focus in on why, what is it? What is stopping him from accepting what you clearly have gotten as this fantastic deal? But do some reality testing with him of, look, what's the consequence if we say no? If we go back and we're pushing on something else, when you've already gotten your full offer, you're going to potentially lose this. And what if it's never repeated, right? Now, that being said, sometimes people are still going to just, make a bad decision. But for you, when you're trying to get them to see that this is the best thing, what if he's delusional on his price? But I think that's where you have to tell him. I mean, you're the expert. You have to say, don't be afraid, in all honesty, maybe don't use delusional, but to say, this is highly unrealistic. You're never going to get this again, right? But at that same point, got the best price in the neighborhood. Tell him that, right? Those are all excellent things, right? But at the same point, Lucia, if he at the end of the day, he's just not going to do it, you've given him your best advice. Not every negotiation ends with success. So
I love it. I love it. So we got a question here on someone who is interested in maybe becoming certified as a negotiation expert and was just wondering if you knew of any kind of programs or certification programs that are out there that our real estate agents could take.
I love that. Yes, couple different things. Depending on your state real estate commission, they may offer classes on this that would get you set up to then go and become certified. Here in my state, Georgia, we have a number of mediation and arbitration companies that do in-house training. That's how I was trained. And then you register with usually in each state, there's like the Department of Neutrals or something like that. To have yourself listed and registered in that state, right? So like here in Georgia, there's a Georgia Office of, alternate dispute resolution, right? So once I get certified, I then put my name in through them. But I would definitely just in your state look at arbitration, mediation training, right? And certification. It's offered through private parties, but it's a wonderful thing. And I would think as a realtor, what an incredible little badge to also have at the bottom of your, email, your criteria that look, I actually have taken classes where I'm specializing and I'm certified in mediation, or in resolution, even if you're not going to become like a mediator and do all of that down the road. What an excellent selling tool to set yourself apart from others.
A lot of good avenues there for us to be looking into and helping just boost our credentials and our negotiation skills if we're interested in it. So we're going to give it another few seconds here if anyone has another question, but otherwise, if I don't see anyone pop one in here in the next 15 seconds or so, we're going to wrap up and let everyone get back to their day. So
I love this comment from Lourdes who says, love using us when you talk to each client. Shows you are on their side, both of them. That is brilliant, right? Make everybody have skin in the game, right? Us, we. I love that. That's an excellent, excellent comment and excellent tool. So
that's a good pickup.
Good comment. Love that.
That's so true. Well, folks, I don't see anything in the chat bar or in the chat area. So we're going to wrap up. Monica, thank you again so much for a wonderful webinar. Yeah. The content is just amazing as always. We really are thrilled that you were able to come here and present to our audience. So thank you so much again.
Thanks so much for having me. I love it. And thanks to all of you out there. Everyone have a great rest of your day. And again, if there's anything else you'd like me to come chat with Ben on, let them know. I'm always happy to come back and chat with everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Y'all have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.